So I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the history of the future of learning. It's sort of a refrain that runs throughout a lot of my work, and that's that we're suffering from amnesia of sorts, right? We seem to have forgotten a lot of the history of technology. We tell these stories now, and I hear these stories as someone who lives in California, as though the past and the present and the future of all innovation comes from Silicon Valley, as though all innovation is recent innovation, right? And that there's no force for change other than the entrepreneurial spirit, the lone computer programmer genius, or of course, my least favorite phrase, disruptive innovation. This amnesia seeps from the technology sector into education and into education technology. And the rich and really fascinating history of education is sort of forgotten and erased. In an attempt, I think, to tell a story about the future of education that emphasizes products and not processes. It emphasizes the private and not the public. It talks about skills, but not really inquiry or curiosity. The future of education technology, if you listen to the story, is, of course, the story of Silicon Valley. It is therefore the story of a few private elite colleges, at least one of which is located near Silicon Valley. And that it's always been the story of Silicon Valley, right? There is really no other alternative. That's the way that the story has been written. So I've been working on a book for a while now called Teaching Machines, which is an attempt to sort of retell a different story. It's the story of the history of education and technology throughout the 20th century. And this year I started a series on my blog, Hack Education, that's an attempt to sort of uncover some of what's been lost. And so I've been trying to tell stories about, for example, how did we end up with the multiple choice exam? Where did that come from? Who invented some of the first teaching machines? And then one of my favorite stories, the story of the Speak and Spell. You see, I'm really exhausted by the sort of repetition of a lot of new education entrepreneurs and technology journalists that technology has never touched education, that the internet has never touched education. That's just not true. I think that, again, this is a powerful retelling of the history that sort of leaves out schools from being forces for change. It leaves out educators and students from being forces for change. Of course, these narratives shouldn't really surprise us, right? We always tell stories about the past in order to sort of direct us into some sort of future. But that means, I think, that the stories that we tell about education technologies, past and present and future, are really, really important. And I'm interested in this idea of the history of the future of education, or what my friend Matt Novak calls the paleo future, right? How can we look at how we've imagined the past, or how we've imagined the future in the past, and sort of understand better where we've imagined the future heading? What does that look like? How do these fantasies shape the way in which we think the education is going to look? So this is probably one of the most frequently cited examples of the paleo future of education technology. This is a 1910 print. It's by the French artist Villemar. It was part of a series in the year 2000 that was commissioned to sort of coincide with the World's Fair at the turn of the century. These prints were parts of cigar and cigarette boxes as well. So this was part of the popular imagination of what the future would look like. And here we can see the teacher grinding up textbooks. L'Histoire de France is one of them. The grinding up the textbooks that are then sort of, so that the knowledge can be delivered electronically into the heads of the pupils. And I think that this is interesting because in some ways it confirms our worst suspicions, or my worst suspicions at least, right? That this is how we imagine the future of education looking, right? That it's going to actually be about content delivery. It's going to be about complacent humans sitting with technology, having knowledge somehow magically delivered electronically into their skulls. The other prints in the series are pretty interesting as well, thinking about the future of technology, not really AI, but certainly how robots will replace our jobs. This is an old fear. This isn't actually just something that we're worried about now because Elon Musk is worried about it too. This is actually my favorite. The job of the firefighter of the future. That one actually seems pretty cool. But in the future, this imagined in 1910, right? We can see humans conquer the sky and humans conquer the machines, but labor is done by machines. And I think that that's really important to think about when we talk about sort of the future and artificial intelligence. What sort of labor is being replaced by robots, right? In these images we see it's often menial labor, it's emotional labor, it's labor done by women, right? And I think that we can think about what does that mean then when we talk about more and more technology in the classroom? What does it mean about the labor that educators do? And what does that mean about the labor of students, right? Thomas Edison famously predicted in 1913, that books will soon be obsolete in schools. And not because books were going to be ground up and delivered electronically into brains, but because, of course, he had invented a technology and invested in a technology that he thought was going to supplant the textbook, right? The motion picture. He said, "I believe the motion picture is destined to revolutionize our education system, that in a few years it will supplant largely, if not entirely, the use of textbooks." He said this in 1922. And then he added, "I would say that on average, you get about 2% efficiency out of school books as they are written today. The education of the future, as I see it, will be conducted through the medium of the motion picture, where it will be possible to get 100% efficiency." 100% efficiency. My God, that would make so many administrators today excited, right? That still seems to be this weird goal that we have about education, this prediction that the goal for education in the future is somehow more efficiency. And I think it gets to the heart of this print by Vilmar as well, right? How do we get that information out of the books, out of the textbooks, knowledge, into students' brains really efficiently? And of course, side note, as cheaply as possible, right? And that's the future of education technology: cheaper, faster, more efficient, mechanized, perhaps automated. And really that's the history of education technology throughout the 20th century. This is from 1923. This was when we thought that radio and radio books and lectures via television, where you can see still the professor is the transmitter, the student, the receiver, right? This one's wonderful from 1958, the push-button school of tomorrow. Again, echoing how we still envision that suddenly information is going to be delivered efficiently. This one is actually from 1961, the prediction that by 1965, half of all students would be taught by teaching machines. Popular science. So you know it's true if it isn't popular science. 1964, World's Fair. This is the auto tutor, or also called, I love this, the automated school marm. Because this isn't gendered at all, right? This is not at all a political endeavor. This is also from 1964. This is the answer machine, this notion in the future that students will be able to answer any question they want, and somehow that equals education. This one, sort of for my child, this one's from a 1981 book called School, Work, and Play, The World of Tomorrow. This is, as you can see, homework in the future. So we have a lot of technological advances, but by God, we're still going to make kids do menial tasks at home. No, that's not actually how they describe it. They say, if we look into the future, there could be no schools and no teachers. Schoolwork may not exist. Instead, you will have to do homework. This sounds so crappy. Because you will learn everything at home using your home video computer. You'll learn a wide range of subjects quickly, efficiency, right? And at a time of day that suits you. The computer won't seem like a machine. It will talk to you just like a human teacher. You'll talk back. And you'll be able to draw your own pictures on the computer screen with a light pen, and so will your mother. The kind of homework in this future will be more like playing an electronic game than studying with books. Eventually, studying a particular subject will be like having the finest experts in the world teaching you. Far in the future, computers will develop beyond humans in intelligence, and then the experts could in fact be the computers, not human beings themselves. So whoever wrote this clearly still writes most press releases for education technology startups, right? 1981, 2015, it's still sort of the same fantasy of the future. I didn't have this book. Growing up, my brother and I had a similar book that was the kids' whole future catalog. And we would pour through the pages, just imagining how by 2015 we would have flying cars and moon colonies. Didn't really work out that way. And sometimes I feel like that's with the predictions of education change as well. I think education is in a difficult position when we talk about the future, right? Because I think that there are certain aspects of education that make it seem intransigent. Education almost necessarily, as we have the system constructed today, is sort of trapped in that tension of the past and the future. Right? Education is responsible for helping students understand the knowledge that's come before, but then it's supposed to prepare them for this precarious future that no one knows anything about, and then we're all a bit fearful of, right? So there's this tension there between innovation and conservation in education technology. I love this picture. This was 1982. This was part of a series of drawings that were commissioned by Alan Kay when he went to work for Atari. Right, so here we can see some of the earliest visions of Silicon Valley, of what the future of education technology is going to look like, what the future of schools are going to look like, the personal computer in the classroom. And you can see that the future of education, by God, it's going to be technological. Right? It's also branded. Atari has their logo all over the place. Right? But there's still desks in rows. There's still a teacher. The students are still sort of going through tasks together. God bless them, they're still rebels. Thank you for the child in the yellow t-shirt. But really, what's new? What's new, really? So when we look back at these predictions about the past, the predictions from the past about the future of education, I think my point isn't that our education system doesn't change or that it refuses to change. My point isn't that somehow schools haven't fulfilled the sci-fi imagination of the push-button school of tomorrow. I think that schools have actually changed a lot, but the changes actually often came from law and policy, a different sort of code than what the engineers designed. But I think that what I want us to think about is how that imagination about the future is really powerful, right? What does that mean? What does that mean when we imagine what the future is going to look like? And again, if we let Silicon Valley sort of dictate this story where they've erased the past for us, I fear that what we'll be faced with is its sort of corporate, branded, increasingly libertarian, privatized vision. So I think we should be cautious when we read powerful stories, think about powerful stories from the future, whether they're Silicon Valleys or Hollywoods or Harvards or Hanna-Barbera's, right? There are no people of color in the Jetsons. That's a pretty powerful vision of the future, right? There are robot teachers and there are no people of color. Not something I'd look forward to. So, all these visions of the future, right? All of these visions of the future of education, the future of teaching, the future of learning, the future of work, they're all really profoundly ideological. They're also very political, right? And as we hear the stories from engineers and entrepreneurs and investors and politicians, we should keep that in mind, right? And I think we also should think about that as well when we hear the rest of the speakers today talk about their visions of the future. We're all invested in building a future of education that is, I think, more technological, but hopefully as well, we're thinking about the ways in which it is also more just, right? And so when we build towards the future of education, it isn't simply about efficiency with grinding up textbooks. It should be about something really, truly transformative. Thank you.